Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. An inter-ministerial panel headed by External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj has cleared a proposal making district magistrates the final authority to clear child adoption cases in a bid to quicken a process that is often hit by year-long delays. This according to a report in the Hindustan Times. At present, prospective adoptive parents have to go to civil or family courts to get the final go-ahead after completing all other formalities related to adoption. But with pendency high in civil and family courts, the report says that it is not easy to get a date for hearing. While a total of 3,276 children were adopted in India between April 2017 and March this year, the inter-country adoption figure was 651. At the same time, the number of prospective parents waiting to adopt children went beyond 15,000. Though there is no official data, surveys by non-government organizations say there are approximately 50,000 orphans in the country and suggests that a much higher number of children should be up for adoption. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze how the retuning of the adoption policy will impact the process of adoption. Joining me on the program today are Enakshi Ganguly, Haq Center for Child Rights; Shankar Agrawal, former Secretary, Ministry of Women and Child Development; Shilpi Jain, Advocate of the Supreme Court; and Nitin Mohan Sharma, a parent who has adopted a child recently. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Let me first start with Shilpi Jain, of course. Shilpi Jain, what does the existing law on adoption state? Shilpi Jain, if you can hear me, what does the existing law on adoption state?
Yeah, you see, as far as the existing law on adoption is concerned, the delay is because it is left to the courts for approval, the family courts and the civil courts. That means that the final approval has to come from them, which is why there is a tremendous wait that the parents, prospective parents, have to go through before there is a, no objection from the courts, because of the long pendency rate in the courts. So I think it's a welcome step, and considering that ours is a country which has overpopulation and poverty, it's a step towards encouraging adoption, which is much needed. I mean, the government should do all it can to encourage adoption and also stop thereby, births of new children, so that parents can, there are parents who are working and they don't want to go through the process of bearing a child, and other issues are there. So it's a welcome step.
Okay, you're calling it a welcome step. How we should go ahead with adoption itself remains a big question. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But before that, let me get in Nitin Mohan Sharma, a parent who has adopted a child recently. Nitin, what was the process that you had to go through in adopting your child?
Well, we started with an online process, and I'm really thankful to the government of India for initiating such process and bringing it online. That really helped. Once the initial information was provided, it actually took us around 2 years. So you choose 3 states, there's an option, and then within those 3 states, there are certain centers that you choose. So we, zeroed in on a few. It actually was a tedious process, because initially it was Himachal, that didn't work out. We went to Chandigarh, that didn't work out. Finally, we got lucky in Faridpur. And after it was around 2.5 years, it took in totality that we finally got our baby daughter. So all in all, you had 2.5 years.
Time and again, you said that you got lucky and hence the process took just 2 years. So I shudder to think how long the process would take if you're unlucky. Enakshi Ganguly, why is there a need for us to change the adoption policy?
Will you give me a little bit of time?
Sure, please. Please take all the time that you need.
I think we need to first ask the question: what is the problem we are trying to address, and what is the solution that adoption offers? Now, I'm a little concerned that Ms. Shilpi Jain should say that adoption is a solution to people who don't want to have children. That was not. So we are putting the need of the adult parents who don't want to have children before the real purpose of adoption. from time immemorial, adoption was seen as a solution to children who did not have parental care. So it is to
and
provide...
also vice versa, parents who do not have the joy of having a child.
But the purpose was to have, not to produce children so that parents who didn't have children should be just, you know, provided with children. It wasn't seen as a baby-making machine, but it was seen as an option for children who needed to be protected, who did not have the joy of, for some reason, lost their parents. As it is, we've made the whole definition of orphan very, very easy in this country just now, because it is also, we allow for parents to surrender the children. If they decide, I today decide that I cannot look after my child, I can give it to the state. Now, should the solution therefore not be in strengthening the families to look after their own children? That's my first question. And therefore the number adoption would, then only those children who have no other option but to be put up for adoption should be put up for adoption. That's the first, you know, given the fact that now we have ICPS, we have community care, we have some sponsorship, all those schemes should be kicking in forms of non-institutional care. And therefore the strengthening of communities and families to look after their own children. Having said that, again, in the second stage, what is the problem again we're trying to express, address? That there is delay in adoptions, right? There is a delay. Why is there a delay? Because the judicial process is clogged. It is under a lot of pressure. There is not enough trained professionals. So is that not the solution? The solution therefore lies in training, in declogging the judicial system. Our judicial system is clogged anyway. It is, the solution does not lie in taking away the mandate from one clogged system into another clogged administrative system. Where
so are you saying it's not going to make any difference in the hands of the DM?
And I was just before I came and I was sharing with Mr. Agrawal, I actually called up a few DMs to ask them if this was the solution. And I've also come across a letter from one of the states, and I'm not going to disclose which one, which has actually gone to the state, to the central government with the petition saying that this is not the solution. So the state governments are saying this is not the solution. District magistrates on whom we are putting this solution as to be implemented are saying this is not the solution, because district magistrates, as they said, we said they have in an average 40 to 50 committees, several other things, and so this will never be the main priority for them in the administrative mechanism. And if it doesn't, then the threats that we want to actually you know, the process that we want to expedite is going to be delayed further, because it will get pushed into the back burner, or it will be done in a hurry, because here it is not running.
And when it's done in a hurry, there are chances that it could go wrong. And
it is not an MNRGA program. Every life matters here.
Let me hear what Mr. Agrawal has to say, because, you know, here you have Enakshi Ganguly, Mr. Agrawal saying that, you know, it's not going to work because you're taking it from one system to another clogged system, and that's what's eventually going to happen. The trouble is going to continue.
You see, the new proposed system is going to make huge change as far as the delays in adoption process is concerned. There is no doubt that there is too much of delay in the normal judicial court or a family court, because they got their own process and they got their own priorities. On the other hand, the district magistrate and the collector, he is already involved in the adoption systems and the process, and he understands what exactly is the system, and he is responsible for implementation as well. So, and I have been a collector and the district magistrate, and I know that in spite of all these pressures and in spite of all these pressing engagement, collector can always find time if he or she is interested in resolving that particular issue. If he or she is given clear instruction that this has to be given priority, I'm 100% sure that they will be able to do a fantastic job, and they'll be able to decide all such adoption cases in time-bound fashion.
Sure. You know, now that the ministerial panel has okayed this particular process, what happens next?
Since it is only the first step, because it means an amendment in the Act, Juvenile Justice Act,
yes.
So amendment can take place only with the approval of the Parliament. So the process is that after this it will go to the cabinet. Cabinet will give its approval, and once the cabinet approves it, it will go to the house, and then it will be tabled in the house, and then the house will decide.
Sure. All right, moving on now. Let's talk about how things will change once the law itself is amended. Shilpi Jain, is it going to change anything once the law is amended?
See, as I said earlier, there is a very urgent need to deal with this in a manner wherein, we can make the whole process expeditious. We have parents who are willing to adopt. We have children who will be better off if they are adopted. Only we need a slight change in the system. So what is the hurdle? Why should we not change that system? Talking of courts, each court today, as a lawyer, I know at the district level has about 100 cases a day. So we cannot expect them to deal with this in a manner different from the way they are dealing today because of the heavy burden. They are extremely overburdened. So as far as the district magistrate is concerned, it depends on the law how many steps he is required to take. If there are only a couple of steps, I don't see why he cannot dispose of this process within 2 days, given the fact that they don't unnecessarily complicate the process and it doesn't entail complications at all. And a magistrate is fairly equipped to deal with this. He is a man who is anyway doing quasi-judicial obligations. So he is equipped and he has a mind which is trained to deal with such issues. So I think ideally it is a situation where it will definitely make things better.
Okay.
And that is the need today. We need, and as far as the population is concerned, I again reiterate that again there is an urgent need in this country to check that in whichever way, and this is the most noble way by which we can, regardless of whether the parents who are adopting want to have their own children or not. It's going to be a situation which is going to definitely help the orphan children and also the parents. It's a happy situation for both the parties. So the government should only be encouraging it and facilitating it by making the process very transparent and easy.
Okay, it's a win-win for all. Make the process transparent and let it be streamlined is what Shilpi Jain is suggesting. Let me go across to Nitin Mohan Sharma now and find out where the roadblocks were when they adopted their child. What was the biggest challenge while you went in for adoption, Nitin?
Well, we need to understand that although things were digitalized and the process was online, there has been a huge gap between once the forms are filled and once the documentations have been provided and verified to actually going to the institutions, meeting the child, and going from there on. Once it was finalized, going to the courts and getting it stamped for approval, that process has a huge gap. And because of which, one participant just mentioned that the judges have more cases that they can handle, which is absolutely true. Now, understand this, we have most of these cases, the delays that I experienced occurred in the non-metro cities. So the reach is far less as far as digital communication is concerned. So a lot of people were trying for a long time, including ourselves, and they did not get timely response because the authorities at the adoption centers did not have all the information that they should have had. So the whole system needs to be digitalized in a more robust and quicker manner. Also, the communication that happens between the adoption center and the courts, that they need to have some sort of, because it is a regular affair. So the expectation is that the information, the documentation that is once provided at the beginning of the process should remain consistent, and
sure,
there should not be any additions or modifications to that documentation, because we travel through different states, right? And there's a child waiting. So there is already an emotional enthusiasm, and there is so much emotion going on. So by the time you reach there and you realize that there's more documentation is required, then you have to stay back or perhaps go back and then come back again. That takes a huge toll. And that did happen in our case as well. So my expectation would be that the authorities will work a little more closely between the adoption centers who actually have the kids and they have the documentation, and the courts, because there was a lot of back and forth which sort of had to happen in our case. So
Sure.
I hope that that gets reduced.
Sure. Okay. You know, talking about adoption itself, let's widen the scope of the debate a little bit. Enakshi, Ganguly, what is the state of adoption in our country today?
We have, you know, we are one of the few signatories to the Hague Convention. So our checks and balances in terms of adoption were put in place in terms of the institutions. We also now, with the Juvenile Justice Act, having included adoption, there are systems in place. What is required is the strengthening of the system. And there's a wide range of non-institutional care options that have been provided in the Act, which includes sponsorship for families which are not able to look after their children, and then there's a whole surrender process by which then the children are meant to go into the adoption process. But on the flip side of it, what we have also found, and at Hug Center for Child Rights, we've had to actually investigate a few of these, was that there's a fairly large amount of trafficking that is taking place of children in the name of adoption.
Yeah, you know, that's something that I wanted to get to as well. Yeah.
And you must understand that we also have a large proportion of missing children. So expediting a process must not mean that there are parents who are actually looking for their children and the children have gone into adoption, and it has happened. We have actually dealt with cases where the children have already gone into adoption and the parents arrived later, and by which time in their search, it has also happened to us that we were able to stop that adoption and put that child back into the family. But clearly,
should that be an NGO's role, or should that be the government's role?
It should be the government's role. And the law, according to the law, the first option is to search for the parents. Now, it takes some time. If Hindustan Times, I remember, did a long story where one of the parents was finally able to find their child only after 2 years. So when expedition is important, efficiency is important, human interest is equally important, best interest of the child is equally important. We are also, we are a little concerned and that when there are systems in place, what we require is not new laws, new policies. What we really require is much more effort into implementing what we have. And in this last few months or years, there's just such a hurry to change policy. It becomes, so this doesn't work, bring in something new. Then that doesn't work, bring in something new. Why not? Let's work to making, now that the SARA, the CARA, the adoption agencies have all been put into place as in terms of institutions, a little time can be invested.
Okay, let's strengthen the system itself.
Let's strengthen the system. Yeah. And then there is a whole system of children's courts, which is also part of the, of our child protection mechanism. So instead of family courts, this could have been the children's courts, for example, which are specialized children's courts, which are supposed to have trained judges dealing with it. And so decluttering the system is important regardless of whether adoption is being done efficiently or not.
Okay, fair enough. You know, Mr. Agrawal, at what level does the duty of the state end when it comes to the adoption process? Does the government, follow up once a child is given up for adoption? What happens really?
You see, first I'll talk about the status. You asked that question from
status of adoption. Yes.
As per my information, there are about 15,000 cases where the parents would like to adopt a child. And last year, out of these 15,000 applicants, only about 3,500 to 4,000 people were able to adopt children. So that means there is a huge gap. What is the expectation or the requirement and what is being catered for? Secondly, as we said a little earlier and as Mr. Sharma was also saying, the entire process should be extremely a pleasant exercise. Instead of this being a pleasant exercise, it's a huge harassment kind of a thing.
So it's cumbersome.
Very cumbersome, harassment, and it takes too much of time. By the time you adopt the child, maybe your emotions are subdued. So that is enough. Now, you are
rather than being joyful, you're relieved at the end of it.
Absolutely. And Now I come to your question. You said when the responsibility of the state comes to an end. You see, state is responsible for every child and every citizen of this country, especially those who are from the disadvantaged section of society. And these often children are from the disadvantaged section of the society. Though primarily the responsibility will come to an end once a child has been adopted, however, it continues because it is the duty of the state to ensure that the child is not maltreated. As ma'am has said, the state has to ensure that the child is not trafficked, and the mere fear that a child may be trafficked does not mean that we should not encourage adoption. We got to encourage adoption in a big way. We got to encourage simplification of the process. We got to make it a very pleasant exercise for those parents who want to adopt a child.
Sure.
But the child needs to be at the centerpiece. The discussion I find is of the parents at the centerpiece. That's my fear. We are not feeding into a market of parents who need children. We are feeding into a market of children who need parents. You know, the flow should be so because otherwise we'll become target driven. We'll set targets, and it's already, I know that there are districts which are now already saying we are not meeting targets of adoption. And it is happening.
Really?
Yes, it is happening.
Okay. I would like to.
I have evidence for it.
Let her complete, and then
I would like to make a small comment on what ma'am has said. You see, the interest and the welfare of the child is inherent. We are doing it only for that. But that is taken.
But it's also important to find the right parents.
Absolutely. So that is already there. We are not debating that issue at all, and that is not open for discussion. The welfare of the child is the most important element.
First. It's utmost.
Thereafter, and because of that, we want to encourage adoption. And that process, we want to make it simplified, and it should be a pleasant exercise.
At the end of the day, we want to give a better home for our children, and that's of utmost importance, and we hope we move in that direction. And to move in that direction, let's find out what's the best way forward. Shilpi Jain.
Yeah, you see, there have to be certain safeguards in place, and the credentials of the adopting parents have to be scrutinized. That is in fact the yardstick which the entire process which entails, you know, the delay or whatever, the screening. It is with this in mind that the children are given to parents where they are looked after well. Their interest can never be compromised, and the entire idea or the process revolves around their interest. But while doing that, the process can be simplified, it can be more logical and rational and expeditious.
Sure. And Nitin Sharma, you know, as far as the process itself is concerned, how do we streamline it even further? How, you know, what could have been done by the government, do you think, or that could have helped you tremendously 2 years ago?
Well, first of all, there's a slight difference between what is claimed on the websites as far as the adoption centers are concerned regarding the number of healthy children, and there's a section of children who are not physically healthy. So there's a difference in those numbers which are posted on the websites and the actual numbers in the centers. These centers more, you know, I experienced this especially in the non-metro centers. So the checks and balance, which includes numbers, like you mentioned, there's a number of parents who want to adopt, and there's a number of children who need to be adopted. Including that, a little more strict checks and balance on the adoption centers who have the children available, their age, their medical conditions. That needs to be updated a little more frequently. So because the process itself is, A, it's an emotional process, B, it's a long process, and parents go through it, right? So the expectation is that at the end of the day, when you meet the child, it should be what it is mentioned on the website or how it's been described. Personally, in my case, it happened that it was not the case. So my expectation would be that, okay, I understand that trafficking is an angle, and child's welfare is the utmost important agenda. I absolutely agree, and because of which, if the process takes time, it is absolutely fine. However, once we reach there, it should be as it is described. So government, on one side, when we scrutinize the parents, it is very important to scrutinize the centers also, who claim that they have healthy children and their numbers and their age is mentioned, but once you reach there, it is not true. So that needs to be checked and done.
Sure. Adoption, Enakshi Ganguly, is an emotional process. It's a sensitive process as well. How do we ensure that it is done right?
I wanted to sort of share with you that I was actually did a fact finding in which I went to a adoption center to see how children are put up for adoption, and it's really, there is a huge amount of, as he says, large amount of misprocess that happens, malpractice that happens, and it starts from the sourcing of the child. How was the child brought into this center? Where did they come from? Was the child a kidnapped child? Was it a trafficked child? That's one. That needs a lot of thinking and a lot of checks and balances in place, because now this whole process of surrender, who surrenders, how is the surrender happening? What are the circumstances under which they are surrendering their own children? People don't just surrender their children. That's one. One of the reasons for this expeditiousness is also the fact that we want to, when I was interviewed by Hindustan Times, I was told this, that one of the reasons is, and Mr. Agrawal perhaps would know, is that the disabled children don't get adopted inside the country, and we need to expeditiously send them into inter-country adoption. Isn't that sad, that our country that cannot look after our own children? Doesn't matter if our parents don't look after them, at least the state should. Do we really have to send them to Netherlands to be looked after? There's a tremendous, adoption is a beautiful process, and I've been part of adoption processes. I have friends who have adopted,
right.
But there is, all of this makes it very hard. Who is responsible? What is responsible? It should, like I said, it should not become target driven. And I fear, because I know I am getting reports that it is target driven, and district magistrates are being judged by how many children they have suddenly put into adoption.
Okay, quick closing comment from Mr. Agrawal. Do we need a systemic overhaul as far as the adoption process itself is concerned?
There's no doubt about that, because unless we change with time, we'll get fossilized. So we got to change with time. And now we got to adopt IT in a big way. As ma'am was saying, and as Mr. Sharma was saying, when you go to the center, you do not know how many children are really healthy. Why can't we have the medical examination every week, and all medical parameters of every child week-wise should be posted on a platform, an electronic platform, so that when a parent go there, he or she would be able to find out how's the health of that particular child is. That is one. Secondly, simplification, improvement is a continuous process. Every now and then we must visit and revisit all these processes, all these laws, rules and regulations to make it simpler, better, transparent and efficient.
All right. On that note then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today on this edition of The Big Picture. See you again next time.